a question from David. How can you implement lean without scaring people with change and Japanese concepts and language? So I think there's a couple questions within the question there. How can we, let me talk first about without scaring people with change. I mean, I think there's a really interesting kind of understanding of people that comes from psychologists and people who look at brain science. It is in our human nature. Our amygdala, exactly, I don't know, Greg, you're the doctor, if I'm pointing out, I forget exactly where
all that many years ago.
Where the amygdala is. But our quote-unquote reptile brain is the part of our brain that we all have that kicks in the fight or flight reaction when posed with changes, even when the change is positive. And so I think instead of lecturing people to not be afraid of change, that's sort of like saying don't be human, I think the most proven approach is to make change small and to engage people. I did a podcast once with a psychologist, Robert Moore from UCLA, and he's written a couple of books about Kaizen and the brain, is that when you make change small, it doesn't trigger that fight or flight instinct and that reaction. And so when you engage people and they become more comfortable with change over time, there's a really good strategy there for Kaizen and continuous improvement to be that entree into lean. Well, Greg, what are some of your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we're living in a really exciting time also because we're starting to understand some of the neurobehavioral science that explains a lot of the principles, kind of almost empirically lean principles and lean thought process over the last 70 years has come to some conclusions of what works and what doesn't. And now the science is starting to catch up with things like functional MRI. Mark Graban, not to be confused with Mark Graban, right. J-A-B-E-N, has just put out, and Mark, you may know the title of the book, but has just put out a really good body of work that kind of starts talking a lot about that and really applying it to continuous improvement. So I think we're kind of living in a really exciting time to understand that. We empirically have known, right? And you'll remember the person that quotes this, people aren't afraid of change, they're afraid of being changed, right? So there was a great, I took a poli-sci class in college, and it was called Political Discourse. And one of the themes of the class is that people will change in front of you if you accept who they are, right? So it's that concept of going to someone and saying, oh, we're going to change this process, or going to them and asking, hey, how can we change this process together to make this easier for you to do your work? And all of a sudden, that's an engaging conversation to people. And one concept that we didn't touch about is the language, and then I'll kind of shut up for your thoughts, Mark. But I'm a real big fan of not using any Japanese terms. In fact, for a couple years ago, I was almost this close to changing the name of the company KaiNexus because it referenced the word Kaizen. That's how fanatical I am about this. Until this just becomes natural language and kind of demystifying this entire thing. It's almost like when you're talking to a doctor and they're using medical terms about what condition you have, it completely alienates the conversation. So I think the less you can use terminology that isn't a part of our everyday vernacular, the better you're going to do with demystifying this whole process. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we shouldn't let words or terminology become a barrier. The same thing could be said about the word lean. If people hear the word lean, it's not the best word for something that's very positive and engaging. Something, when people hear lean, I've heard people in organizations say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, oh, we're already lean, we don't have enough staff as it is.
Right.
Like, well, that might be one use of the everyday use of the word lean, not having enough. Scarcity, shortages, that's not what lean manufacturing or lean healthcare was supposed to be. So if the word lean is getting in the way, then I would avoid that word. I try not overdoing it with Japanese words. I do use the word Kaizen. You could say continuous improvement. I think introducing people to the word allows you to have a conversation about the concept.
Right.
of Kaizen and how Kaizen is different than suggestion boxes and in other approaches. That's one benefit. But I say waste instead of muda. There are some Japanese terms that I hear where I have to go run to a glossary or do a Google search. I only know a handful of Japanese terms, and I think there's a risk where sometimes people use the Japanese words to sort of say, well, look, I know more about this than you, which can be, instead of demystifying, it sort of creates some barriers possibly to engaging people and improving.
And that I think is this, I don't want to say it's always manifesting out of insecurity, because it's not always insecurity that people do that, but it's that we're trying to become more professional and establish authority by being able to use terminology that another person can't. I mean, it's what medicine did in the 1800s, because I mean, a lot of the medicine they were looked at as quacks, and so well, let's create an entire vernacular on this that shows that we're professionals. And so I think if we're going to take this to the common people, we need to use common language, and every time you can not use a Japanese word, do that.
Right. So the next time a doctor tells a patient to take that medication PRN, we'd say, well, wait, why not just say as needed, right?
Exactly.